This is part 2 of localization of your app and a continuation of a good discussion we had about 3 weeks ago, I guess it was. And so, David, I'm going to turn the screen over to you.
Okay, so can you guys see my screen? I think you can. Good
There it
morning or
is.
afternoon or whatever time it is. We've got a small group today, so we're gonna probably get some good remarks and some good comments. But the last time we talked about this localization idea, we just kind of flew through it and tried to talk about how we're gonna get the current language of the device and all that kind of stuff. And we talked about a few different strategies, mostly revolving around using multiple configuration files. So if you have a configuration file for your app, we talked about one way to do that. And so since then, though, I want to show you something here on my screen. Since then, Susan has taken it upon herself, and I'm super, super stoked about this, to try to organize. Let me find the how-tos here. So in the how-to section, you'll see down here a new link to White Buffalo Mobile, which is Susan's company. And this link goes to a localization web page, kind of a project page, where she is organizing some folks in our community that speak different languages to provide the localized files for the different languages and the different platforms, so iOS and Android. And so if you look at, for example, the Italian iOS project text file, you'll see that this is the language file for Italian, which is kind of cool. And so in your projects, where we have this localized file for English, you could add additional localized files, which is a relatively trivial operation, or exercise, I should say, based on her work here. And so huge props to Susan for taking care of that. And we'll see where that goes. Her and I, we've been talking about some other strategies, and it's one thing to have a localized strings file, but it's another thing altogether to localize your app entirely. And Miguel, who was in the last hangout about localization, brought up some good points about, like, how do you localize the actual content? This is just some simple words and some strings in your app, but how do you localize the content? And that's where we talked about using multiple configuration files. So that's what we're going to do today. I did create some notes today so that I don't have to just type in front of you. I'm going to be copying and pasting some stuff, but I'll explain it. I was kind of tinkering with this earlier. So let's get started. And here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this application on the simulator. It's a very, very simple application. It's called My English App, and I'll show you what it looks like, and I'll show you what I did in my control panel to try to accomplish what we're talking about. So it's a simple menu app. It's a regular home screen menu with 1, 2, and 3 menu items. And so, of course, that could be anything. In our control panel, move this stuff around. In my control panel at BuzzTouch, I have 2 different applications set up. I have a Spanish application and I have an English application. And so if I look at this English application and I look at the screens and actions, you'll see that I have a menu. That's what we're looking at here. And then I have 1, 2, 3 little simple web pages. And so those are just going to Google right now. And so I set this application up just for this webinar. But if we go back to my applications, we look at the Spanish application. It's in essence the same thing. I created another application, and I just named it my Spanish application. And it has 3 screens also and a menu. And you'll see that I tried to do Spanish. I think casa is home. I thought it might even be house. I can't remember. Miguel can probably laugh at me. Well, he's Portuguese, but I went Spanish because that's the closest thing I could come to a second language. But anyway, so I have uno, dos, tres instead of 1, 2, 3 on our menu. So we have two applications set up is kind of the idea. So I went to my English app and I downloaded the source code, and what I end up with is the English version, and then here's the app, and I haven't changed anything. And so I just launched it in Xcode, and this is what we have. So if I hit refresh, it's just going to go to the control panel and launch this English app. So the idea is, what if we wanted to run multiple configuration files in our application, one for English and one for Spanish? And of course, there would be no limit to how many of these you could make. So this is only one approach of many, and I'll show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to my configuration folder in my download, and I'm going to copy this configuration text file, and then I'll just paste 2 versions of it. So I have 3 copies of it now, and they're all the same. So I'm going to rename one of these btconfig en, which is a language code for English. And I technically don't even need to do the English because the regular config one is English, but the languages aren't important. It could be anything that we wanted. And then I'll name the other one btconfig es, which is the language code for Espanol. So I have 2 language files now, and I have my configuration file, the one that came with the project. So because these are the same, that isn't going to make any sense. So the English one matches the English app because that's what I copied. But I'm going to go to my Spanish app, and I'm going to get the configuration data for that Spanish app using the configuration data link, and I'm just going to copy it. And remember, it has some Spanish words in it: casa, uno, dos, tres, stuff like that. So I've copied this to my mouse. And I'm going to open up our Spanish configuration file, which is still English because I just copied the other one. And I'm going to get rid of all this, and I'm going to paste in here the data from the Spanish app. So the app ID is now different because it's using the app ID from the Spanish app right here. The URL, of course, for the data is different. The menu that I set up isn't home, it's casa. And the menu items are uno, dos, tres. So this is a Spanish version of this simple app. I'm going to close my control panel or minimize my control panel. Now we're going to go into Xcode, and I'm going to show you what we're going to do here. So the first thing we need to do is we need to add these 2 configuration files to our project, English and Spanish. I'll drag these over right under the other one. So now I have 3, the one that it came with, the English version, and the Spanish version. So if I launch this right now, I'll just hit the run button and launch this again. Nothing's going to change. It's still an English app because it's pulling from this English data right here. So we don't want to pull from the English data if this person doesn't speak English. We maybe want to determine what language they're running. In this case, we're going to switch the simulator to Spanish here in a minute and run the Spanish configuration data. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. We could just type in here some file names, and we could do, a lot of different approaches, but I'm going to take a little bit more sophisticated approach, and we're going to build a couple of arrays or lists of languages, because we might want to add some later and things like that. So we're going to be working with what's called a language code, and we're going to be working with the language label itself, like Espanol and French and German. The language codes for those are different, like English is EN, Espanol is ES. So I'm going to create a couple of arrays here in our delegate file, and I'm going to make these mutable arrays, NS mutable array, and I'll call one language codes, and I'll call another one. Remember I told you I had a little cheat sheet here? I'm just going to paste this so I don't have to type. I'll call this language codes and language names. And the idea is one's going to hold the codes of our languages that we're going to support, and one's going to hold the names or the labels that we're going to show on the screen if we ever decided to do that. We may or may not want the user to be able to choose the language. We may want to just do it automatically. So we've got to do a couple of properties here down and set up the properties for these instance variables that we made. So these are mutable arrays. One was called language codes, and one was called language names. Okay, so that's the work for the .h file, just 2 new properties. In the .m file, because we made the new properties, we need to synthesize those. So synthesize language codes and language names. Perfect. So far so good. We haven't worked with those yet, but let's fill those up. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to take the variables, the language codes and the language names, and we need to initialize these arrays. So NS mutable array, allocate some memory, initialize. So we did that for codes and we did that for names. And then we're going to add in some values for these because our application doesn't know anything about what we're trying to do. So we're going to add to our language codes array an option for English, or EN. That's the international code. That's what iOS will report to us. And then we're going to add a code for Spanish, or Espanol, which is ES. And then for our names, we're going to just name them. This is the human format, so English and Spanish. And I'll show you how that, what we'll do with that. So the next thing we need to do is try to think about this kind of logically. The configuration file name that the app is going to use when it launches is just the standard default buzztouchconfig.txt, which is over here, and we're all very familiar with that. But we want to change this configuration file based on which language the user has set on their device. And you'll see here that I named these language files on the left kind of strategically. I could have named them anything, but it's just easier to keep track. I put buzztouchconfig underscore and then a 2-digit code, EN, and then buzztouchconfig underscore ES. And so we're going to build a file name based on the language that they're using. So let's get the language that they're using, and we're going to use the locale class, the built-in locale, INS locale object in iOS. And then so this language value now is going to be ES or EN or FR or something like that. So let's print that to the log to make sure that we know what language this device is running. Just to make sure, it'll be a good kind of stopping point. We've really just added a few lines of code here. We've made a couple of arrays, and then we're accessing the language of the device, and we're going to print it to the log. So down here in our console, when the app first launched, it's the very first line here. You see where it says EN? That's kind of cool. So now we're successfully learning that this thing's running English. So if I reset this simulator, I'm going to reset it, and then I'm going to go to the simulator settings, and I'm going to change the language to Spanish or Espanol. I'll say done. When I run this app this time, the app's still going to be in English, but you'll see at the top in our log, you see where that changed to ES? So we are successfully learning that this application is running Spanish now. So with that knowledge, I'm going to reset this back to English. Reset content and settings. We're going to go back and forth between Spanish and English here for a minute. So with that knowledge, we can, as programmers, make some decisions. So we're going to go, okay, so it defaults to English when I reset it, which is great. Okay, so let's build a file name out of this language that matches this file name over here. We want to find btconfig underscore English, or of course Spanish or something like that. So let's use this, regular string with format class, and we'll build the name of the file, and then there we go. So I'm saying, hey, I'm going to create a new string, and I've named it language file name, and that's going to be a string with format here. So I just typed in btconfig, and then this little %@ sign, that's a placeholder for this value after the comma. So the value of this is going to be something like this: btconfig en.txt or btconfig es.txt, or if we had config french.txt, right? If the user had his device on French, I'm assuming French is FR, well then this would be the value of our language file name. But our project doesn't have a French configuration file, so that could be a problem. So before we just say, hey, use this file, we got to make sure it exists. So we're going to want to say, does this file exist in the project? So we'll use the BuzzTouch File Manager, and we'll say, BuzzTouch File Manager, does file exist in bundle? We'll say language file name. And if it does exist in the bundle, then what we'll do is we will overwrite this configuration file name with our new name. So our app just launched. We assumed we were going to use the standard one so that everyone will be supported at least in some capacity. We found the language of the device, and then if we have a file that matches that language name tacked onto the end of this, then we're going to use that. So let's make sure this works. It's still English. And I'm going to stop after we prove that this works. Okay, so we're still English. Let's reset the simulator. Reset. I'm going to change it to Spanish or Espanol. Done. And then I'm going to relaunch this app. And what we'll see here, if all goes well, in our console, we've identified that this is the Spanish app. And then if you notice here, this is now drawing from the data in this Spanish configuration file. So we were successful. And so in our control panel, we are now using the Spanish apps data instead of the English apps data. And I can refresh this, and we're in Spanish. And so that is one approach where we set up a different application, one for each language that we want to support, and then we include in our project the list of those languages. We didn't use the labels yet, the language names. We'll do that after I'm going to open this up for some questions, and then we'll go back to a more advanced approach. Well, it's not more advanced, it's just a little bit different. And you may be wondering why I have this little right menu button up here, and I'm going to demonstrate something else. So let's stop there and see if anybody has any questions at this point. Did everybody understand what I just did, or is that just too crazy?
Yes, yes.
So I'm not seeing anything.
Your account that's currently with us.
Don't see anything, chat.
Yeah, no, David, I don't have any questions on this end. There's
okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Susan did just raise her hand. So
okay, cool.
And iPhone and Android
Susan, unmute your mic and go ahead.
Yeah, actually, this is really cool because I guess I didn't capture this before I was.
I don't know because I don't know your name. I have no details about you.
And
I'm hearing somebody, but not Susan.
Oh, can you hear me? Oh boy.
Susan, we can barely hear you. I went ahead and muted out Daku7 and my SPS.
Okay, I must have something wrong with my mic here. Oh, hang on, I'll fix my gain. How about that?
No, you're better. You're better.
That's better.
Sorry about that. My gain was turned low. Anyway, this is actually really, really cool because I was just kind of studying how to do this without having BuzzTouch. And it's a million times more complicated because essentially you have to create a separate project that a separate .lprog for each language.
Mm-hmm.
So with BuzzTouch, you're able to bypass all the work. Actually, now that I saw this, I think there's even more power in BuzzTouch and localization because BuzzTouch makes it a lot easier to localize than it would be otherwise.
Yeah, and here's another thing. That's a great point. And here's another thing that you might not realize. There's nothing that says that my Spanish application has to match my English application. In essence, what we're doing here is running two apps in the same project, because what if my Spanish application has, additional content or additional menu items or whatever? It's more than just the words on the screen. It could be the whole entire thing could be different because you learned that they were in Spain.
Oh, yeah, there could be cultural differences or something. But you can use all your resources again, which is what you have to duplicate, I think, in other, if you don't.
Exactly.
So if you didn't do BuzzTouch, you'd have to have duplicate every other resource would have to be duplicated, because you have. Well, I think how it works with the standard way of doing it for Apple is it pulls the correct LProg project out when you download it.
Yeah, there's no doubt that there is a place for additional language files. There's nothing bad or wrong, and this is an important concept. There's a significant difference between what we just did using a database and a back end in the cloud to manage content for a couple of different apps. That's different than these localized strings, these simple words. You're still going to have situations where you'll probably have a Spanish strings version as well, because when an alert comes up, do you want to place this call? That's not going to say, do not call. It's going to say whatever do not call is in Espanol. So you'll probably have a combination of you'll probably use a combination of these strategies depending on, again, just kind of depending on what you're trying to do. That's all we're saying. So
yeah, but when you go to the Apple way of doing it, it's even worse than that. It's not just a localized strings and it's a separate. You have to actually go into your the Finder and then bring all your resources in your Finder into that other project. You have to go outside of Xcode to even add your resources to the project. This is like way easier.
I think it depends on what you're adding, Susan. You may be right, but you can easily go to the project and use in your, I think it's Target. It's been a while since I've done this, but I think you can go to build phases and add language. We did this last time. I always forget where it is. Build rules, maybe. Info, URL types. One of these has got a language. I can add a language in the localization section. I'm not gonna explore that now. Yeah, here we go. So in the localization section, I can add Spanish. And that doesn't have anything to do with, that'll just create another localized strings file. And it doesn't have anything to do with I don't think what you were saying, which is images and other resources, nib files and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the point is, localization is tough, right? It's not an easy concept to grasp, but we have, in my opinion, made this much easier and much more flexible by just localizing, just using different configuration files. And I think it's kind of I don't think it's necessarily a good idea to try to make a really, really high quality app that supports a bunch of different languages without knowing what you're doing, because it can get complicated. But so the next thing that Miguel was asking this, like, what if we wanted the user to choose the language, right? In this method, we just automatically said, hey, use Spanish, and we detected it from the device. And that's not bad. But because he was asking, I think I want to demonstrate another little idea here, which is kind of slick. And remember, since we're using different language files, and I don't want to confuse everybody, but in essence, we're kind of saying choose another app, right? You're not really saying this could be anything. These could both be English, but just be entirely different looks. But we're sticking with the language concept. So what I'm going to do, and the reason that I put these in arrays, is I'm going to connect. Let's go back and get our English one running so I can read it. I'm going to connect this right button to a list of choices that the user can maybe choose the language. And this is just, we'll demonstrate a few things here that I think some of you will get some things out of. So in the config file, for my menu screen, which is right here, I've added a right button type, right here, right button type action. And if I go to my control panel, I'll show you where that's in the control panel. I did it on the Spanish one and the English one. Screens and actions. On the home screen menu, on the top nav bar, I have, oh, I guess I didn't do this in here. We'll say action. I probably did it in the Spanish one. Action. So I'm choosing action, but I'm not choosing, there's the nav bar right button type. I'm not choosing a screen to load. I don't want another screen to load when I tap that button. I just want it to trigger the right nav method or event. I'll show you that'll make sense here in a sec. So what we're going to do is we're going to modify what happens when we hit this button. So what kind of plugin is this? What type of screen object is this? This happens to be a simple menu. So I'm going to go to the plugin screen, and I'm going to find the simple menu. And this is not related to just language stuff. I think a lot of you might be interested in this. If you look in this class file, and it's pretty long, there is no method in here called like right button tap. Right? When we tap that button over here, you know, what's happening? What method is being triggered? And if we look at our console, I'm going to clear this again. And when I tap this button, watch what happens in the console. It's saying, hey, screen menu list simple nav right tap. And I go, wait a minute. I searched this whole document, nav right tap, and that doesn't exist in this. And then I think to myself, oh, I remember. That's because all the plugins are based on this BuzzTouch View Controller class. It's handling all the right taps. So if we go to the layout and we look at the BuzzTouch View Controller, it does have a right nav tap, or nav right tap, I should say, like this. So I don't want to use this one. I don't want to load a view controller, which our console's saying, hey, you didn't connect anything to this. I don't know what to do. I'm going to override this right nav tap in this one plugin. So I copied that. I'm going to paste this in. I'm going to paste this into our menu list file. And I'm going to type in here in the menu screen. I'm going to get rid of this, because this button is already connected to a method called nav right tap. But I want to build my own method in this one screen, so I just copied that method and pasted it in this file. Watch what happens now. We can capture that right nav tap on this screen only, and we didn't modify it for any other screens. We just modified it for the menu list. And when I tap this button now, you see down here in the console, we're not calling the method in the parent class. We're calling this method right here, which is kind of slick. And that's called overriding. So override right button. And that in itself is kind of a cool little lesson that a lot of you guys can probably benefit from. But we want to do something when we tap that button. And what I think I'm going to do, in fact, I did this earlier, so I'm going to copy some stuff. I'm going to slide up an action sheet, a UI action sheet that shows the list of languages that are available in this app. And remember, we set those languages up in our delegate. So we should show the user, hey, English or Spanish. So that's why I put them in arrays here in the delegate, because I knew that we were going to be doing this instead of just manually typing them. So because these values are available in our app's delegate, because we set up these properties in our app's delegate, that means that we can access them and use them anywhere in our project. And the way that we do that is, I'm going to paste this whole method that I wrote, and then I'll go through it line by line. This is the right nav tap method. So I'm going to move this stuff down so we can just talk for a minute. Okay, so we're in our nav right method. And the first thing I'm going to do is going to get a reference to our application's delegate file. And we do that all over the place. You see it in tons of the code. And my notes are driving me crazy. I'm kind of OCD on the way I do things. So I have a reference to my delegate, and the reason that we want a reference to our delegate is we want to show the list of languages that we set up in the root of our app. And we're going to show them in a UI action sheet, which we're all familiar with. The UI action sheet is that thing that slides up off the bottom of the screen. So UI action sheet, I called it action sheet. We're going to allocate some memory for it. We're going to give it a title, choose language. And we're going to tell the action sheet that when somebody interacts with it, that this file is going to be listening for the delegate methods. Ooh, so I better go over here to my .h file and implement the UI action sheet delegate methods. Cool. So I'm going to listen for these. And then we don't have a cancel button. We don't have any buttons on this action sheet at this point, because we need to build those buttons dynamically based on how many languages we have. So add a button for each language. I'm going to do a little for loop. Hey, while this variable is less than the number of languages that we have, AppDelegate language names count. So I'm going to jump back here to the AppDelegate, and I'm going to say language names count should equal 1, 2, because we have English and Spanish. So we're going to loop through those languages, and then for each language that we find, we're going to add a button to our action sheet. So action sheet, this thing right here, add button with title, and then what's the title we want to use? We want to use the title from this array of titles, but while we're looping, we're going to change it, right? So we want the object at the first index, the second index, the third index, example, so on and so forth. And then when we're done, we'll add a cancel button at the end. And then we have to tell iOS which one of the buttons on the action sheet is the cancel button. So we're going to say it's the last one. Well, we didn't know how many there were, so we had to say language names count. So if there were 2 buttons, then our cancel button will be the last button. If there were 5 buttons, it would be 5. And then we're going to show it. So let's run this real quick and see what happens. And we didn't make any connections to these buttons, but they should show when I click this right button. So now we have English, Spanish, and cancel. So another simple example is, what if we had French, German, and Portuguese, because Miguel's here. Hopefully I spelled that right. Now we would need to add those same codes here, FR, GR, I don't know, PT maybe? I have no idea. And we don't have these files, they don't exist, so we're not, you know, I'm just giving you an example here that we can add buttons to the action sheet because we used an array, and that makes it really, really flexible. That's all we're saying. So now we have all these choices. And I didn't have to write any extra code, I just used the length of this list that we made. An array is a list. Sometimes if you just call it a list, it makes it easier. Okay, cool. So that's what happens when we tap the nav button. Now, what action triggers when you hit cancel or you interact with any of those buttons? Well, because we're implementing the UIActionSheet delegate method, we can listen for an event called clicked button at index. So action sheet, click button at index. So we're listening for this event. I'm going to move this all down so we just don't even see it. I'll comment it out. To prove to ourselves that what we need to do is figure out what button did they click. So I'm just going to print that to the log, because iOS is going to pass into this method not only the action sheet that was interacted with, but the number, the index, the NS integer, the number of the button that they clicked. And we'll print that to the log right here so that we can see which button they clicked. And we need to know which button they clicked so that we can learn which file to use as the language file. So if I click cancel, this is button index 2. It starts at 0. So this is 0, 1, 2. If I hit English, it says English. I have a typo. Let me go back and fix my English. English. Funny. If I hit English, I'm button 0 because they start at 0. And if I hit Spanish, I'm button 1. So that's cool. So we can use that information to tell us which language they're dealing with because we have a list of languages. So once again, I'm going to get a reference to my AppDelegate. If the button index, in this case 2, is more than the length of the array, well then we're just going to ignore because, you know, we somehow screwed up. In other words, there's more buttons than there are languages or something goofy like that. We don't have to test for that, but it's a good idea. But what we're going to do if they choose a language is we're going to do the same thing we did up here. Right? We're going to build a file name out of this language. And so instead of saying, you know, it's English or Spanish or whatever, we need to get the button index right here and build it into this file name. So let's log that file name, language selected, and I'll put a little placeholder for a string, %a, and then I'll put language file name to make sure that we're capturing the right language. Now remember, we don't want the label of the language. We don't want it to say English. We want it to say EN or ES because that's the name of our files. So let's click the Espanol one, and you'll see here btconfig underbar ES because we built that right there. If we do English, it's bt underbar en, btconfig en. So that's cool. So we could act on that choice. We could do all kinds of things with that. We could refresh the whole app. We could show them another screen. We could do all kinds of things. But before we do, we want to make sure that this file exists. Because remember, what happens if we might have goofed, right? We might have said French, but we don't have a French configuration file. I'm doing this on purpose. So watch what happens. If our logic was to refresh the whole app using the French information, that doesn't exist. So we have to decide, yeah, so there's the language file name, but we know that doesn't exist. So we want to make sure, does this file exist in the project? And this is the same logic we did up here, right? I just wanted to demonstrate to you how important it is. So if it exists, do something neat with it. If it doesn't exist, you could either ignore or show an alert, whatever. So let's just show an alert. I think I have a show alert method that's built in the parent class. Let's see. Hey, yo, language not available. God, my fingers aren't working this morning. I thought I had show alert, but apparently not. Is the self.show alert? Show message? What the heck is the name of that in the parent class? Let me look. Show warning. I'm going to go to the BuzzTouch view controller. Oh, there it is. I was missing some parameters or something. So let's fix this. So we're going to say, oh, it is called show alert. What the heck did I do? Syntax maybe. Whatever. We'll log it. We don't need to alert it. We'll just log it. And it's log. No language file found. So if we do this, that's going to happen if we hit French because that doesn't exist in the bundle. So if I choose English, everything's cool. If I choose Spanish, everything's cool. File does exist in bundle, says right there. But if I choose French, file not found. So we would do something, take them to another screen, and we would probably discover that during testing because it's our app and we would never want a user to run into that. And so what would we do? I don't want to take up all morning, but let's reset the configuration file name, reset file name in delegate. We have access to this delegate now, AppDelegate, set, what is it, configuration file name. We're going to set it to this new name that they chose. There we go. So you could do lots and lots of things with a little bit of creativity, a little bit of flexibility. None of these are quote unquote the built-in iOS way to do things. I don't want everybody to assume that this strategy or this approach is, you know, what you're going to find in a manual or a textbook or a lesson or something. So you're not going to see this. The only reason we can take these approaches is because we have isolated, I don't know what I want to say, or modularized our rules for our app in this single configuration file. And so we can do all kinds of different things like Susan was trying to explain. But so there's a lot of approaches. Hopefully for Miguel, that helps him understand how to set up some languages. It should help him understand how to show a list of choices. I can think of there's a million different ways, right? We could show them, you know, we could show him, as soon as the app launched, we could show the choices, or we could have a menu of choices, or lots of things. I prefer to not do this. I prefer to take all this out of here and just do it automatically. I don't think users should be choosing languages. It just doesn't make any sense to me because they're not. It's not like they're going to be switching back and forth. But depending on the need, I can see that happening. So we have about 10 more minutes, or actually we have about 20 more minutes to talk about some questions or something. I'm done with this, with the content in this webinar. I don't want to go too far because we'll get confused, but I will recap what I did. We talked about Susan's cool language project, which is awesome. We have 2 apps in our control panel with the whole intention of just basically the end user doesn't know there's 2 apps. This is just a management decision that we made. So we have an English one and a Spanish one. And then we connected those, we chose one of them to submit and to compile. I'm using English. And then we added files to the other ones that from the config data, and works out pretty good.
Hey, David.
So raise hands, chat away. What's up, Lauren?
Looks like Andy Kitts has got a question and be followed by Susan.
Cool.
Andy,
hi, David. You all right?
I can hear you, my prison guard friend.
Yeah, you're all right. Just a quick one. Just out of interest, with the config data, would we have to put all the config text into the app, or could we still pull it from the servers? Does that make sense?
Doesn't make sense. Tell me what you mean again.
Okay, we pull everything, don't we, from the control panel, which is the basic BT config.
Right.
If we update, say, the Spanish version, will that automatically transfer down as well?
Yeah, see, what would happen is, that's a great question. The answer is yes, but that's because as soon as your app launches and reads this configuration data that's baked into Xcode, it downloads the version from the control panel, this version here in each app, config data, which is live and refreshable and all that kind of stuff. And once you do that, it saves that on the device, and this is then ignored. The only reason this data exists in this project is so that if the user doesn't have internet the very first time they launch your app, beyond that, this is no longer used. So if you changed it in the control panel, does that make sense?
Yeah, it feels like a bit of a stupid question now I've asked it because I just realised where
it's not a stupid question, because think of it this way. This happens all of the time because people don't quite understand the relationship between this, what they compile into their project, and the behavior. And let me take this a step further. Let's say that you make an app and you submit it to the store and the person has never ran it. And then you change it in your control panel. The first time they launch it, they're going to get this data regardless of what your control panel says.
Yeah, that's
been a little bit of an issue, but the reason it has to work that way is because many users don't have internet when they launch your app. And when the moment they get internet, then it will refresh and download the latest copy. And then that will always be there, even if they don't have internet. The next time they use it without internet, it will be the latest, the version they downloaded before, because it saved it on the device. So hopefully that didn't confuse it even more.
No, to me, it just made it was just, well, yeah. I suppose it's good to know, but I knew that already, and I don't even know why. But obviously, as the first configs start downloaded, then the rest of it just kicks in, doesn't it, once the internet.
Sure, so. Totally.
Cheers, David.
Good to see you or hear you, I guess. Is it middle of the night there? Must be.
No, this is the perfect time for me. We're just coming up to 8 o'clock at night.
Yeah, it's about lunchtime for me. I'll be eating lunch in a little bit. So, Susan, what's up?
Well, I have a couple of questions about how to. They're more specific about how to create these localization strings.
Okay.
As we're working on this. The first one is I did put the call out, and actually Kitsy had a couple of really good adds to the list. So we're adding to the English list.
Okay.
Before we get it translated, because the thought is before someone translates, let's get the list, make sure we've covered the various things, and so I think we've added 7 things to the list.
Awesome.
I put those at the end, because some things are already translated, so it's easier for the person translating to find them. But the order doesn't matter on the list at all. It's just going to use that NS localizable string, and then it's going to go on that NS localizable message, and going to find the one with the right name. Is not going to look at the It doesn't matter what the order is on the list in any way, shape, or form. If I want to put them in at the end, just to help the person that's translating find it to know what to translate.
Totally. Here's how I would do that, and there's a lot of different approaches to take, but the bottom line is that the only thing that's really the thing that's the most important about this file is that if I have three of these in my if I have three of these in my app, like let me add a couple. If I added Spanish, where's Espanol? Spanish, and I added German. You see how it adds them over here on the left? I've now got 3 files. This is the original one I started with. The Spanish one, as at this moment, matches. And then the German one matches. So this is what we'd be overwriting, copying, and pasting from your resource, right? I would go to here, and I would get German, and I would copy this, and then I would overwrite it here in my German file.
Okay.
So the thing that's critically important is that every single key, back, next, done, okay, all the way down this list, there has to be the same number of things, and I can't ask it for, you know, in the code, if a developer says, hey, get the label for cancel, and the English one has it, but the Spanish one doesn't, then the app will break.
Oh, it wouldn't default to the second. Okay, that's kind of serious.
There's nothing to default to because you're telling it use Spanish, and you've provided a Spanish file.
Yeah.
So there's no default. It's saying, hey, it doesn't work, and so all I'm saying is while you're editing these, probably the best approach is to do what you said. Add them to the end, and then just use an editor that has line numbers. So that we can all be sure that, hey, all of these are called keys and values. All of the keys and values, I have them all in each of my files. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
It would be easy to determine why it broke, but I'm just saying that if I was the person managing these different language files, the number one thing I would try to do is come up with an easy approach for the translator, and then the number 2 thing I would do is come up with an easy approach to know that, okay, I have all of the key names in here.
Okay.
That's all.
Yeah, but that was kind of a risk, and that's why I guess my instinct was right, because I wanted to find out what we were missing before we started this whole thing, but we really have to have controls on adding new things to this list.
And that brings up a great point. You made a reference, and I completely misled everybody when I misspoke the last time we were together. I said, I just can't believe I did this, but I remember doing it. I said that when you use the localized strings class, the built-in class, this is the name of the key that we want to get the value for. And then this is the default that will show if this key does not exist. Give me 1 sec here. I got a couple of things going on. That's completely wrong. Completely wrong. This default value will not show if this key does not exist. And the only reason for this default value is so that the translator knows what this is supposed to mean.
Oh, okay.
So it's just a slight kind of misnomer, right? I get confused talking about all this stuff.
Yeah.
So this is going to look for a key name attached document error. And in English, that's going to be right here. So if our German one didn't have that, then we'd run into an issue.
Yeah.
And we could do some testing, and I know that was the case, the last time I messed around with it. Who knows? Maybe they made an improvement, and maybe it does, search all the way up this tree or something. You know what I mean? I don't know.
But the order does not matter when we.
The order does not matter.
Skitsy and I have added them so far, but okay. I did check with some of the other best developers to make sure there weren't more to add, but that does kind of make me kind of nervous that, well, most people aren't going to even use them. Most people don't even know it exists, except for
that's okay. Don't be nervous about it. It's just, we're all in this together, trying to come up with a more efficient way for all of us to make localized apps, and so I wouldn't be too worried.
Next question I had is, okay, so before all the apostrophes, and now I'm not seeing it on what you're showing us, but before every apostrophe, it has it. Oh yeah, no, there's a backslash, the reverse
backslash. Yes.
Right.
In this file.
And that's necessary because so that the so it knows it's not code, it's a string, right?
Yeah, these are just comments.
No, not the double backslash, or maybe it's the reverse backslash. You know where you put
Oh,
that.
the reverse backslash.
You see that before the apostrophe? How do we handle apostrophes in this, I guess, is the question.
In iOS, you shouldn't have, that's called escaping, by the way, right? Like, what if this says, instead of phone call, what if this says phone calls, like that?
Yeah.
In iOS, you should be okay just like that. But if you see an apostrophe like that, you usually see that in JSON data.
Mm-hmm.
And that's called escaping the apostrophe, and it's just a technical term for, databases and compilers and, operating systems. They all freak out over the apostrophe. So if you put the backslash in front of it, you're just telling the computer you're dealing with that, hey, this is an apostrophe coming up.
Mm-hmm. But there are apostrophes in here, because actually people have noticed that in these reverse backslashes, these escapes, they've noticed that, and then.
Okay, well here's one I'm
But
seeing.
no, I can't find one.
Well, could it have been somewhere else? It's all over the place in.
Oh, maybe it's in the Eclipse one, in the one that's for Android. Oh, here this. No, I don't see it. Maybe it's something I've seen in a display. Well, that brings up another good point, is that what you see is with these is not always what's there, and David, you pulled it up once, and then you saw some special characters that every apostrophe had been replaced with special characters, with the whole host of characters, and but then it was correct on what I had posted, so people's browsers can't read the special characters in the other languages, although people that are using other languages probably would know.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, let me do what you're talking about here. If I go to Italian,
okay,
this is a perfect example. Can you see this on my screen right there?
Yeah.
What is that character right there? That is not in the alphabet.
No, it's some kind of it's a code with in Italian. It's a language. It's a letter in
No,
Italian.
it doesn't have anything to do with the language. That is not. This is supposed to say something like here's another example, like an A with the crazy thing on the top of it. That's not in Italian.
No, I know. It doesn't know what to do with that.
Exactly. So what this is somebody typed these translations in Microsoft Word or another word processor, and then they pasted into a document and sent it to you.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Microsoft Word characters that this browser doesn't know what to do.
No, but not in this case. You sent me that email on that, and I checked into that, and because it's correct, and it's even correct in Dreamweaver. It's correct all the way to posting. But what's happening is when you view it in Safari, if you don't have Unicode set up for whatever your browser is, then your browser doesn't know what to do with it.
Right, and so the problem is, though, is this device right here, it's going to download it with the same technology and HTTP request that basically Safari uses. So it's going to download this. Yeah. Not that, I mean, we don't download language files, so I'm not trying to confuse the issue, but let me copy all this, for example, just for fun. This is Italian. Let's overwrite our Spanish file with it.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying that in here I'm not going to see it, and I'm disagreeing. I'm seeing it right here. See that? That is not a character.
Once it's wrong, it's always wrong. But what I'm saying is what I pushed out to the internet was correct. It did not have those weird word codes in there. It had it was coded correctly with what I pushed out. And then the way I got it to resolve is when I went to Safari and I changed my my setting from Western to Unicode, and then it would display correctly.
Right. So the problem is that the device doesn't use Unicode. Everything's what we call UTF-8.
Yeah.
So this is not UTF-8 data.
Right, but I'm pushing out UTF-8 data.
Right. So we're kind of getting off the track a little bit, because this challenge technically doesn't have anything to do with the language. It's the way that web pages are encoded. Because what if this person in German or in Italy made a web page HTML? We'd have the same problem.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? And so look, I just translated it and it goes away. But this doesn't go away. What are these characters? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you have different languages, all I'm saying is we have to be sure that and I can guarantee that this is done in Word. You cannot create that character with a plain text editor. It's impossible.
Yeah,
So when
yeah,
you
but yeah. I'll have to show you, David, because what I pushed out, when I pull the same file up in Dreamweaver, which is what I pushed from, it does not have those problems in it.
I understand, because Dreamweaver's rendering the text and using Dreamweaver, for example, is not a text editor either. It's complicated, and like you said, we should probably get together on it or whatever. But the source of these characters is a word processor. So that's the same reason you don't want to paste into like this box here on your web page if you're working with an HTML page. If you paste in, if I go here and I make a custom HTML page, this happens all the time because people don't quite understand what word processors do. If I go to custom HTML and then I go to this page and I paste something in this big long document that I wrote with Word, and then you looked at the source, you will see these crazy characters. And those crazy characters are the word processor's way of formatting everything that you... Remember, word processors, people drag and change colors and fonts, and every word processor works a little bit differently. So you sent a language file to somebody, they translated it using a word processor, which seems fine and harmless, but it's not, because they introduce crazy characters with their tilde and their accent and their whatever, and they sent it back to you, and you happen to have something that can read it, which is fine. But in the plain text world, it's still plain text. It's hard to understand. But we'll get there. We'll just come up with a strategy.
Yeah, well, it's just something we have to figure out.
Or you and I just got to figure out, what the heck it means.
Pardon?
You and I will just have to... I mean, we could fix the little issues after they send it back if we knew what they were. I just can't read this stuff.
Yeah, it's hard when you can't read it, though.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's figure this out.
So maybe it's something like translate it, paste it into Xcode, and see if it's right. And if it is, great.
Yeah.
Oh well. And again, that's kind of related to languages, but more related to what we call text encoding, which is complicated.
Oh, so in an apostrophe we don't need the backslash. We don't need the reverse backslash in
not in these language files, no.
Or how about an XML for the files for
Android? You should be fine because it's the XML data element inside what they call the node. You should be fine with you shouldn't have to escape regular strings in a strings file.
Okay, all right.
Cool.
That's my list.
That's your list. You're a hero. Everybody's going to love your language project.
I hope so. But I think it's going to be good. It's interesting how people are stepping up to translate. How my SPFs already had a bunch of files that other people can use today. And I put a bunch of disclaimers on, like you better check and make sure it works and test and everything. Right. Because they're the kind of thing we're working through. But think of what we've gotten done just in a week on this project.
Oh, it's unbelievable. That's what happens when you get, people dedicated and focused and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Put my project back before I break something.
Hey, David.
Okay. Warren, what's up?
Hey, Miguel is waiting patiently. He's got a question for you.
I'm sorry, Miguel. Was I ignoring you?
No, you won't. First, I just wanted to thank you for this. This is exactly what I was looking for. And as an example of why a user might want to choose the language, instead of having the app choosing for himself. For instance, I'm Portuguese, and I like to read stuff in Portuguese, but I've got my phone settings, everything to English, because I just hate the localizations that the Portuguese words use. But some apps, I got some cool apps, but I have them in English because the app automatically chooses English because my settings are English,
Yeah.
So that might be a reason for somebody to
that makes perfect sense, and it's funny how, as open-minded as we all feel like we are, I think, with our, our shrinking world and our planet and all that stuff, at the same time, we're really closed-minded. Like, I would have never even considered that because I guess that I'm just spoiled that everything I look at seems to work fine. But in your case, that makes perfect sense. So you could make an app that really sets itself apart because it's sensitive to those kinds of issues. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and for instance, whenever you come to visit Portugal, I can just lend you my phone and you can use some apps in English, even though the settings might be in Portuguese. So.
What's the biggest city in Portugal?
It's Lisbon.
And are you there?
Yes, that's where I live. Yes, it is.
Okay, so I'll be there someday. Susan, we got to have a conference in Lisbon.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Warren, you on it? You setting that up?
Well, you just pick a date and we'll get her set up.
We got to figure out. Hey, do they have drag racing in Lisbon? Cars going straight really fast?
No, well, it's illegal, right? Well, some people do it illegally, but it's.
Well, we got to introduce it, Warren. Let's go to Lisbon and go 200 miles an hour in a Camaro or something.
Well, all I can do is 150 in a Mini Cooper. That's the best I can do for you.
Okay, guys. Well, it's noon. Let's get back together Thursday for another Q&A. And until then, I got a ton of stuff I got to get to.
Okay. Well, thanks as always for your time, David, and thanks everybody for joining us. We'll get the recording posted on the YouTube channel as soon as I can get it done, and then you're right. We'll see you on Thursday, same time, and it'll be open Q&A with David.
Okay, guys. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.
Hey, Warren.
Yes, sir.
I just like to talk to Susan. Is she still there?
I'm still here.
Oh, hi, Susan. I just wanted to suggest regarding the localization files that maybe it would be a good idea to have like a master file, like a master localization.